Hello everybody, this is Prime again. Today is the 3rd of November, and the leaves have started falling from the trees in a big way, and it's getting cold at night, and so today I'm going to tell you about sledding. Now, I grew up in Colorado right at the bottom of the Continental Divide there, the Rocky Mountains, and it was 9,000 and some feet elevation, which at the time didn't seem that high because the mountains all around us were like 14,000, and we would drive over them to Denver every time we needed to go do something major because we did not live in a big town at all. So, we didn't think twice about it. But we had winters that were pretty serious about being winter. We would have, I know that there was one winter where we had a good solid 4 feet of snow on the ground for quite some time. It's probably the winter of '83 when it flooded, but there was just tons of snow every year. And my poor parents had to shovel the driveway, but all of us kids got to play in the giant, 5 to 7 foot tall snowdrifts along the sides of the driveway from all that shoveling. So we just thought this was the world's most awesome thing. And during the 8 or 9 months that were winter, the be all and end all activity was sledding. There were a few people who possessed those wonderful things called snowmobiles, but they were kind of the far-off great and glorious gods on Olympus. They were not down with us mortals. The mortal children went sledding, and everybody had some sort of sled. Most people had the flying saucers, just the round kind of dish-shaped sled. A lot of people had flexible flyers, the ones with the metal runners that you can't even buy anymore because everybody decided they were dangerous. But seriously, they are the world's most awesome sled, and I cannot even tell you how sad I am that you can't get them anymore. You have to be on really hard-packed snow to drive them, but they are full of awesome. A lot of people just had kind of basic toboggan-y type sleds, plastic sleds, whatever, but everybody had a sled. It did not matter how poor you were, you had a sled. So it would snow, and we would bundle up in our boots and our coats and our snow pants if we had them. I think pretty much we always had snow pants because it was really slagging cold. And, mittens, because gloves were worthless, you had to have mittens. Hats. If I didn't wear a hat and there was snow on the ground, I would get a monster killer death earache. So I always had to wear a hat or hood or whatever. And then we would go out sledding. Now, we lived in the mountains, so our house was a trailer in a trailer park, and the only thing that wasn't mountains was this trailer park. You had to drive along a road about maybe half a mile around kind of a giant pasture to get in this little cove of mountains where this trailer park was. The towns in this area were not set up all nice grid system, whatnot, or anything like that because there were mountains in the way. So you'd have little pockets of kind of subdivisions of towns, and these are tiny towns, but they're in, all these little subdivisions. Please excuse, I have a cold. Anyway, so our little subdivision area thing was called Summit Cove, and I forget what our trailer park was called. It had a name too, but I don't remember. And our street was named A Circle, I remember that. Anyway, so we would go out, and the first place you could sled was just on the street in front of our house. And it was kind of an upside-down U-shape. There was one long straight road that was, through the trailer park, and then there were all these loops or circles. And so you would go up to the top of the loop and sled down the nice straight road down to the main road. And during the day, absolutely no one was driving. They were all at work. So you could be in the middle of the road all day long and it was fine. Especially since the only people who were going to drive on it were, the 5 or 6 families who lived on that particular stretch of road. Anyway, so we'd go up to the top and we would sled down. And this was major flexible flyer territory because it was a road. And during the winter, you did not see the pavement of the road. They would plow, but it snowed so much that they were always covered with snow. And, it would get icy and slick from everybody driving on it. So on these metal runners of the flexible flyer, you could just whoosh down this hill. And it wasn't terribly steep, but it was a good slope, and so you could really go. And we liked, because, you can steer a flexible flyer. It's got that straight wooden bar across the front that you push with your hands or your feet, depending on how you're riding it, and you can turn. Can I just say again that this is the world's most awesome sled? Anyway, so we would go, and we would like to kind of go urging back and forth and around between, either catching all of the iciest spots or perhaps avoiding the bits where the pavement was starting to show through a little bit or the ice was getting a little thin. So it was very, it was very NASCAR. This was before there was NASCAR, but who cares? It was very fun. So that was, the closest sledding thing. Then if we wanted to go a teeny bit further afield, and this was what we did very often too, we would take our flying saucer sleds, just the round dish-shaped ones, and we would go down the road, across the main road, across the drainage ditch thing, and up the other side, up the hill. I think it was just called the hill. And it was a good-sized hill, and it kind of ran all along that, main road edge of the trailer park. And all along that entire sort of eastward-facing face of that hill, we would make sledding runs. So you trek up the side of the hill, and we wouldn't ever go all the way to the top. We would just go, up a ways, and, the bigger we got, the more we would go up, the higher up we'd go. And you trek up, and you're trekking in at least a foot of snow, and, you would kind of walk in the footsteps of whichever kids had gone in front of you, and it would make almost like a ladder or staircase. You go up, you set your sled down, and to make a run, you just kind of go and do your best, and you kind of urge all the way down, and then the next time it'll go faster. But you have to understand, this was a hill covered with sagebrush bushes, and they were all about, because this was, higher elevation, so I didn't know that sagebrush grew bigger than 2 feet tall. But anyway, they were all mostly about 1 to 2 feet tall, and the snow would get deep enough that it would go right over them. So when you're making the first sled run, you do not really know where the bushes are. I may die, but hopefully not today. Anyway, so we would sled down, and you'd get to a place where a bush was, and you'd kind of plow over it. And the best times were where you would plow over a bush and then down on the other side of the bush. And those would make great jumps for when the run got a little bit stiffer and you could go faster. And I remember there were sometimes when we got older and braver, we'd go and we'd make these really long runs, and we'd kind of have a little memorized where the best kind of jumps and places were, because we lived there for 9 years, and you have long winters, and you kind of start to know kind of where things are. And so we would make these really epic runs. And I remember one time I went down, and I did not slow myself down with my hands, and I went really fast. I went over this jump, a sagebrush bush, and I landed on my back, and I must have gotten a little bit knocked out, because I remember going down, and then I remember waking up on my back. And I was like, oh, okay. But yeah, I don't know. It was fun. We were indestructible. The last thing we would do and this was kind of the biggest deal, and it didn't always work, so it was always a special treat when we did it, was there was always, okay, so this was, mountain country, and there were a lot of tracks and trails around. And during the summer, we'd ride our bikes on them, which was so fun. And during the winter, people would drive their snowmobiles on them. And there was one path that went up. Wow, I could tell you guys so many cool things about what we did when we were little. Anyways, it went up from the dirt hills, which I will tell you about later, up past the rocks, which I will tell you about later, and all the way up to kind of the super top secret Air Force base, which we did not know what it was, but the giant jets would come over, and we thought it was like super secret Area 51 thing. I think it was just a campground, but it was very awesome mythos when we were little. And so we go clear up to the mountain on the other side of the trailer park, on the east side. And actually west side, never mind. I've always been bad at keeping east and west straight when I'm speaking about them. Anyway, so, blah, blah, blah. We would go on this long trail, and it was at least a quarter mile long. And so you and you had to take the flexible flyer sled, so it had to be a really good, well-packed snowmobile track. So we had to wait for a day that was cold, had kind of frozen a little, melted and frozen a little bit the day before, and wait for people to have gone on this track with their snowmobiles often enough to really pack it down. And we would take our flexible flyers and we would trudge all the way up. And this was not a steep path. It was a long path, but not very steep. And we'd trudge up to the top. And the top would kind of curve up and be a little steeper. And we'd get to the top, we'd get on our sleds, stick our feet on the steering wheels, hold on the sides, and go. So you get a decent head of steam at the beginning, and then you just kind of trundle along. The sleds wouldn't really stop. They would just kind of go, and it was very, very pleasant. It wasn't fast or scary. It was just kind of a nice, long sled run. You go and dip-de-dip-de-doo and look at the world and la la la. And then you'd get to the very end, and at the very end of this track, it would go down a sudden steep hill and then a really sharp curve around to the right. And so you have to be really just crank on that steering thing of the flexible flyer. And we hardly ever made that turn. And if you didn't, it was okay. But if you did, you got to feel really cool, and you got to sled a little ways further than if you would just, kind of plow into it at the bottom. So that was sledding. And I guess one of the other things that I should mention too, that we would also do, this is back at the hill, when we would make our long sled runs, there was an area where you could make a run that went down, not just to the path that ran along the face of the hill, but it would go across the path, up over the little kind of, I guess this was the old dirt where they had dug out the drainage ditch, but it was kind of a ridge of dirt all along the edge of the ditch, and it would go up and over that and down into the ditch itself. And that was what we would do when we were older, and we figured out where and how to do it. And that was like the world's most epic thing, if you could make it all the way down, up and over, and down into the ditch. Getting down into the ditch wasn't that amazing because it was, rocks and ice and things, but we always felt extra spiffy if we ever did. So yeah, now I'm always kind of, every winter I want to quote unquote go sledding, but I've never lived in a place that had anything like what I thought of as quote unquote real sledding, because yes, people would have, what they thought of as sledding hills, but they were really boring and lame because the snow was not usually quite as deep. I mean, even if it was as deep, the hill would just be some boring, road or path or something, or like the edge of some park or other where the, grass sloped up, and it's just so boring and just tame. And so one of these days I'm going to find a good place to take the kids sledding, and show them what, real mountain sledding is. But until then, I'll still have to keep looking. Here I am in Utah. You'd think I could find something like that, but I haven't yet. Anyway, wish me luck, and I will see you next time. This is Prime out.